Welcome to the Alex Salmond Show, where we turn to the future of the Labour Party. The Christmas election was a crushing blow to Corbyn-led Labour. Instead of the hoped-for election surge as in 2017, Boris Johnson coasted to a near landslide win and Labour were left bereft. This is how the Labour leader conceded defeat on election night and set the scene for the current contest.
I want to also make it clear that I will not lead the party in any future general election campaign. I will discuss with our party to ensure there is a process now of reflection on this result and on the policies that the party will take going forward.
Now, to take part in the race for Labour leader, each runner has a number of hurdles to jump. MP support, constituency party support and trade union support before they get to the opening of the ballot in 2 weeks' time. A number of potential candidates have already fallen at the first hurdles, leaving just 4 hopefuls with their eyes still on the special conference result on Saturday the 4th of April. We assess their prospects and thus the future of British Labour with 2 key commentators, Steve Richards and Professor Richard Murphy.
If Johnson is a disaster, the question is Keir Starmer the man who could replace him? If Johnson is a success, it doesn't matter what Keir Starmer does because Johnson is going to be in power for 10 years. So the question is, can he actually nail Johnson down?
I can see leaderly potential in Lisa Nandy in a way that I didn't expect to, a few months ago. I can see why she is doing as well as she is. She started as the least well-known, but has fought much the most impressive and interesting of the campaigns.
The new Labour leader will face the changed political landscape of Brexit Britain. And on that point, this is how you reacted to our programme on B-Day. James says, great show again, but that Welsh Lib Dem, Lembit, should join the Tories. We'll let Lembit know, James. Stephen Beat says, we are not European because a bunch of backward xenophobes dictate whether we are or aren't. We are Europeans because that is where our hearts lay. We will still be Europeans after the 31st, whatever Westminster say. After all, we still call ourselves Scots, despite over 300 years of attempted assimilation. Patricia said the country did not vote for Brexit, only England did, and then put us into a Tory dictatorship. Moira Robertson says it's a withdrawal agreement. Nothing's going to change on the 1st of February. As time goes on and on and on, it will start falling apart. Mag says, sad day. Hopefully an independent Scotland will get back soon. And finally, David says, I'm only interested in a Scottish voice in the world. We are ignored by Westminster. Now, only 4 candidates are still in the Labour leadership race. Emily Thornberry, Lisa Nandy, Rebecca Long-Bailey and current runaway favourite Sir Keir Starmer. Alex looks at their prospects in turn with political commentator Steve Richards and former Labour economic advisor Richard Murphy.
So Steve, Richard, welcome to the show. Now, looking at this race for the Labour leadership, Emily Thornberry, Lisa Nandy, Rebecca Long-Bailey and Sir Keir Starmer. Now, we're going to start from the outsider to the favourite. So we start with Emily Thornberry. 100 to 1 her odds now. We're not even sure she'll get to the starting gate in about 10 days' time. What do you think about Emily? Has she added something to this contest?
In a way, it's very surprising that she has struggled to make a big impact. If a year ago, I think most political commentators, if they were asked who had a real chance of winning the leadership, she would have been very much up there. And it appears that what has happened really is that Keir Starmer, who we'll talk about later, has basically stolen her constituency before she even had a chance to address it. So even though she is well known, she has been Shadow Foreign Secretary, which is a very senior post in the Shadow Cabinet, has stood in at Prime Minister's questions, which is a real test of being leader of the opposition. It appears that even almost before the race formally began, she didn't have enough of a constituency of support to propel her forward and hasn't really had momentum, which is, of course, a key element of a campaign.
And Richard, what about Emily Thornberry's argument that she's bested Boris Johnson at the dispatch box? Was that not something that would appeal to the Labour membership?
That overemphasises the importance of the dispatch box in very many ways. I mean, it is important in the Westminster bubble, but in the world outside, maybe not so much. The world outside remembers her for mistakes, the white man issues. But she's also one of those people who seems to fall into a category of politicians, so those who are destined to get near high office but never be leader. She has all the qualities to be, as Steve put it, a good shadow foreign secretary. She might be a good foreign secretary, but would she be a good leader? I think people have their doubts about that, and I can understand that. It doesn't appear she has that ability to pull people together, and a leader has to do that. And she seems to be lacking that element. And people sense it. She's not winning the support as a result.
So next up, Lisa Nandy, the Wigan MP. I mean, she's got some good reviews for some of the interviews she's doing. She's 10-1 in some of the odds at the present moment. Is that too long a price?
Her big failing, she did fall out with Corbyn. There is an element which still says you should have been able to accommodate him. And if you look at it from a purely analytical point of view, could she pull everyone together? I suspect there's a real doubt in people's minds about that ability, and that's where at present she'd fail. If she has a chance of being a very senior member of a new shadow cabinet, when there's another leadership election, which inevitably there will be, she might do very well.
So another MP, Lisa Nandy, could she still emerge as a surprise packet in the race?
I can see leaderly potential in Lisa Nandy in a way that I didn't expect to, a few months ago. I can see why she is doing as well as she is. She started as the least well-known, but has fought much the most impressive and interesting of the campaigns.
How about that rather unfortunate remark on Catalonia? Because most people draw the line that successful socialist governments sort of batting old ladies across the head, not even in power when that was happening, incidentally.
Yeah, and that shows, I mean, she claims she was misinterpreted, but I've kind of read back what she said, and it wasn't entirely misinterpreted. And that shows that, I think that highlights the kind of looseness of some of the thinking. And she fell into a trap, and that would be a big one, because Labour, in some way or another, has to deal with its Scottish problem. I don't believe you can just write off Scotland if you're part of the Labour Party. Most of the time, she's been rather authoritative, or, and this is as important, given the impression of being authoritative.
So that brings us to Rebecca Long-Bailey, the Corbynite candidate. But in the very early stages of this race, she was actually the favourite, trading at even money at one time, but it's drifted out to 3-1, 4-1 in most books. Is her cause gone the wrong way irreparably, or could she make a comeback?
So far, she has proved not to be a great campaigner, whereas Lisa Nandy appears authoritative. Whether she is or not is a different issue. Rebecca Long-Bailey has failed to convince a wider part of that membership that she has those leaderly qualities. So I think it's a failing in her candidacy, and so far an inability to escape stereotype. I'm told that she hates being called the continuity Corbynista candidate, but if you hate it, you've got to get away from it, and she hasn't really.
Yeah. So would you agree with that analysis? I mean, we're still, because she's guaranteed to get to the later stages of this race, is there still time for a comeback? Are there some signs she's hitting a stride after a shaky start?
Well, I've known Rebecca Long-Bailey a little bit for some time. I stress only a little bit, but we have met. And actually, probably for as long as I've been seeing Lisa Nandy in action. If you'd asked me several years ago which of those two I thought would be Labour leader, it would have been Lisa Nandy, by the way. And that would still be my view now. I don't see the leadership qualities in Rebecca Long-Bailey, and I feel that actually she has been, frankly, given a bad hand by her support team. I mean, 2 weeks after the election, we didn't hear a word from her, even though everyone knew there was going to be a leadership campaign. She felt as though she was under control, not allowed to be her own person. It all feels as though the central machine has been controlling what she's been delivering, and I don't think Labour's membership is very keen on that. I agree with Steve. I don't think we can presume there is a typical Labour member. The Labour membership that I meet, and I do meet Labour members, I'm not a member, but I meet lots of people who are, and they are very diverse in their interests. We go right back from the old style Brown and Social Democrat, etc. people. There are Blairites still, and there are, of course, the Corbynistas. So there is a very broad spectrum of people. Does she fit into any of those categories comfortably? No. Does she have the charisma to actually persuade those categories? No, as well. So as a candidate, I don't think she's been the person to carry forward the Corbynista flair.
So that brings us, Steve, to the runaway favourite, Sir Keir Starmer. I've been checking that. I think he's the first knight of the realm to run for Labour leader. Obviously, previous Labour leaders have sometimes ended up in the House of Lords, of course. But as the candidate for Labour leadership, a knight of the realm, Sir Keir Starmer, a London MP, in a time when Labour are struggling in the north, eliminated in Scotland.
He's probably had cause to regret accepting that knighthood every now and again in the context of the Labour leadership, where he never obviously refers to himself as Sir Keir. This is really interesting as well, because it, again, to some extent, challenges stereotypes. So like a year ago, virtually everybody was saying, we've already discussed, A, this Labour Party would only vote for a Corbyn-type figure, and B, next time it would have to be a woman. So whenever Keir Starmer's name came up, they said, not a chance, it would be a woman. He might as well not stand. Instead, he's running away with it. As you say, a North London lawyer with a knighthood. And that just suggests to me that, again, the impact of that colossal defeat in December has hit home. Some in the media in Britain are saying, oh, they haven't come to terms with it, they're still pretending the defeat didn't happen. If that was the case, Keir Starmer would not be as far ahead as he is. They see in him a weighty, credible, authoritative figure who might, no one can tell in advance, who might be the leaderly figure to lead them towards some kind of recovery. And that's why he's doing much better, I suspect, than any political commentator would have predicted a year ago.
So, Richard, does Sir Keir Starmer have that gravitas that you were alluding to earlier on?
I think that the knighthood is quite interesting in this context. And I suspect he's got more reasons to be grateful for it than Steve suggests. Right. Because, in fact, the knighthood does say he did something real. He was Director of Public Prosecutions. He is a QC. He did take some cases which were thought to be very significant by the left, admittedly some that they weren't so keen on. But the point is, he has a track record of competence, and that is a badge of that. So in the sense that the knighthood is simply, I've done something else in life, I've managed a big organisation, I know how to deliver. This stands out, makes him stand out from the crowd. And I believe is actually what the big difference is, because Labour is desperate for somebody who can run it. And let's be totally honest, the last couple of leaders have not actually stood out from the crowd in that way. Ed Miliband was a career from very young age politician. He had never done anything else. Jeremy had spent a very long time on the backbenches in effective opposition, never run anything. Here's a man who's actually achieved. I believe that is the whole basis of his appeal. Almost any policy, so long as he's sensible, and in many ways he's being quite cautious on policy, will stick comfortably with him because he can say, I can deliver whatever it is.
So, in a word, guys, is Sir Keir a shoo-in for the leadership?
We've only got one word, have we? If it's one word, yes, but you always qualify predictions in British politics these days. No one can tell for sure, but it looks like it.
Richard, one sentence then.
As close as there is to a shoo-in, yes.
Join us after the break, where Alex will ask our panel how Labour fit into the new political landscape of Brexit Britain. Welcome back. There are 4 candidates left in the race to become Labour leader and reach the finishing post of the opposition dispatch box in the House of Commons. But is there any chance of the new leader leading a Labour revival strong enough to threaten the grip of Prime Minister Boris Johnson? Alex continues his discussion with Steve Richards and Richard Murphy.
So, Professor Richard Murphy, we reckon Sir Keir Starmer at this stage, and it looks like he's a very, very justified, heavy odds-on favourite. But the bigger question is, can he be Prime Minister? Is it possible to come from the defeat of last December to get to the Prime Ministership over the course of this parliamentary term?
That's not something that's entirely down to Keir Starmer, of course. That's not down to any member of the Labour Party. A lot of that is down to what Boris Johnson does and whether he's competent or not. Remember the old rule, governments lose elections, oppositions don't win them. So if Johnson is a disaster, the question is Keir Starmer the man who could replace him? If Johnson is a success, it doesn't matter what Keir Starmer does because Johnson is going to be in power for 10 years. So the question is, can he actually nail Johnson down? Is he able to exploit those failures? Now, I'm torn on that issue because I don't think that Keir Starmer is the best dispatch box operator. He's a bit dull, to be blunt, and he even looks a bit dull when he's at the dispatch box. He's not an animated figure, but he is coldly analytic. And he does, therefore, see the issues. If he can formulate the strategy and react on his feet, which is something, let's be honest, Jeremy Corbyn was not good at. And at Prime Minister's Question Time, Jeremy Corbyn was awful at the follow-up question. Keir Starmer is a natural for that role as a QC. If he can do that, then he has the ability to get Johnson on the ropes. But it's only if Johnson gives him the chance that Keir Starmer has the potential. Once things go wrong for Johnson, if Keir Starmer has the killer instinct, then he has the ability probably to actually achieve it. But all of those are conditions to be taken into consideration. So yeah, he could win the next general election, but there's a lot of ifs on the way.
So could Sir Keir Starmer blow Boris Johnson off course, or will he require a bit of help?
There's a very good quote from a former, well-known, now dead, Labour cabinet minister called Barbara Castle, who you would know much about, who said of Margaret Thatcher, power made her beautiful. Now, what Barbara Castle meant by that was, you cannot tell in advance whether the crown is going to suit a figure until they become leader. Many people thought Margaret Thatcher was going to be a terrible leader, that the crown wouldn't fit. But power made her beautiful, whether you agree or disagree with what she did. So in advance with Starmer, it's very hard to tell, as it is with all candidates, whether power will make him beautiful. I suspect that in some respects he will struggle. I think parts of the media will go for him and he will find that difficult. And that he will find it frustrating bringing to life a project when so much focus is going to be on the government. Labour can't defeat them in the House of Commons, the government, because of that majority. It can announce policies and no one will pay much attention because it's not going to be in power for the next few years. So it's very, very tough. Whether we have a moment of catastrophe for this government, who knows? You don't know until the catastrophe happens. But there are certainly going to be moments of great internal tension within this ruling Conservative Party. And a clever leader of the opposition will be there to exploit it and then turn things round.
I'm just thinking about Jeremy Corbyn in a year or so's time. Let's assume that Sir Keir Starmer becomes Labour Party leader. And Jeremy's on his allotment in a year's time, looking at his successor being demonised and looking at his successor still perhaps in the horns of a European dilemma. Will he permit himself a wry smile at those who said it was all about his leadership?
No, because he's basically, Jeremy Corbyn, for all his epic flaws as a leader, is a nice bloke, and I don't think we'll get any malevolent thrill if his successor is suffering. But I think the key to whether he or whoever wins this contest succeeds is the few successful leaders have always addressed the why question, which you did when you were leader of the SNP. You didn't just go around in Scotland saying, if you vote SNP, you will get independence. You constantly said why you were in favour. If Keir Starmer can say why he should be Prime Minister, why Labour should be back in power, and begin to convince the electorate, he may well win. But if he doesn't even try, he will lose.
But Richard Murphy, isn't there a more fundamental thing even than that, which goes beyond the personality of a social democratic opposition leader, beyond whether you can compress your policy aspirations into a few understandable objectives, more a crisis for social democracy in general? I mean, there aren't that many social democratic parties unless they've got something else going for them. which are winning across Europe. How can Labour become one of the few successful social democratic parties?
The answer to that question is really down to economics. Now, I would say that I'm a political economist, but I happen to think it's true. And one of the things that worries me about this Labour leadership election is that we have 3 lawyers and a former charity worker in the campaign, and none of them have shown particular flair for economics, and that is not particularly encouraging, because Labour has to have a credible economic narrative, because the right have slaughtered it for years on the basis of we've got to balance the books because that's right, because we're like a household. It isn't. The government is not like a household because it controls the money supply. And in fact, if it doesn't create enough money by actually lending it into existence, there's not enough to keep the economy going. But the point is they then need to actually break away from this idea that the balanced budget is the key thing and that the government can responsibly be the deposit holder for private savings, which is all that government borrowing is. Now, there's one country in Europe that has done this quite well, and curiously it's Portugal, where Portugal has broken the stereotype. It has lived within the constraints that were trying to be imposed upon it by the ECB and others, and it has gone to beat austerity nonetheless. Keir Starmer needs to be over there studying that example to see how they built a narrative around this more successfully than anyone else, to actually persuade people that austerity was a disaster. It has been a disaster. Even the FT think it's a disaster, but he's got to turn that into political success. And there's a long way to go before he persuades people up and down the country that what the political commentariat think is a disaster is actually a disaster in the eyes of the person in the red wall.
Tim Richards, let's look at Scotland for a second. Does Sir Keir Starmer understand why a social democratic party, the SNP, have been so successful in Scotland, whereas another social democratic party, the Labour Party, have gone from the heights to a single solitary MP left? Is that going? It really occupies mind trying to work out why that's happened.
I'm sure it will occupy his mind because, as I said earlier, I don't think he, and I suspect anyone who becomes leader of the Labour Party, if it's not him, would just say, oh, let's write off Scotland. Because the implication of that is the gains Labour must make in England are huge in a way I think that goes beyond the Blair era. So it will try, and he would try, and work out what has happened in Scotland. I don't think for 1 second he's got any of the answers to it at the moment. There will be a deep search for what possibly could bring about some kind of recovery. But given Corbyn's uncharacteristic optimism being wholly unfounded, it just shows the scale of the challenge for whoever takes over the leadership of the Labour Party in April.
So, lastly, Steve and Richard, they used to say President Reagan had sleepless afternoons when a world crisis was dawning. Boris Johnson, which of the Labour candidates would give him sleepless afternoons? Who does he not want to be Labour leader?
The only one that he would not want is Keir Starmer. And I think that's one reason why the Labour Party membership want him. I don't want to dismiss the others. I just don't think they have the ability to hold him to account in the way that Keir Starmer has. And we may be wrong, but he looks like the person who could have that ability to literally nail him down. No leader wants to be made to look uncomfortable, wrong, forced into a difficult position with the smart rejoinder at the dispatch box or wherever else. And I think Keir Starmer has that potential, and that's why Boris Johnson will be most frightened of him.
Is that what Dominic Cummings was whispering in the Prime Minister's ear about the Labour leadership?
I think most broadly, at the moment, Dominic Cummings, Boris Johnson and others aren't really worried about the Labour leadership race at all. They've got power almost to themselves at the moment and are focusing on how to use that, and boy are they using it in unusual ways. As far as they are addressing it, I think Richard is right. There's clearly within Boris Johnson a sort of fear of scrutiny. He doesn't like interviews. He didn't like the last House of Commons very much, where he didn't have a majority. And I think he would be worried about Keir Starmer at his most forensic.
And there's nobody behind Boris Johnson saying, remember, you're mortal?
Not at the moment. I think this is a number 10 with, well, there's no leader of the opposition, really, there until this election is completed. They've got a big majority, much of the media dote on them. And whereas Tony Blair had always to face Gordon Brown as a counter in the Treasury, number 10 faces no equivalent cabinet minister. So at the moment, there is a mighty number 10 and no real opposition until this leadership contest is resolved.
Steve Richards, Richard Murphy, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Many commentators, and particularly those sympathetic to Labour, are weighing in about the current Labour leadership being in denial. They argue that Corbyn and Corbynism was unsellable to the electorate. The current expectation is that the Labour membership want to elect a winner and will tack back a tad to the centre, with Sir Keir Starmer as a more respectable figure who will prove more difficult to be lampooned by the mainstream media. However, they may be doing the Corbyn camp an injustice. There is at least an argument in the wake of the Red Wall collapse in the election that Corbyn's instincts on the view in England on the European Union were better founded than those of most candidates to replace him. It is likely that the problems for Labour are more fundamental, with even their radical programmes struggling to compete in an age of populist politics. Look beyond the Red Wall to their formal citadel of Scotland, where Labour are hopelessly outflanked by the SNP and the Tories on either side of the constitutional question. As a result, they didn't end up with a 30+% of the vote and near 200 MPs, as in England, but 20% and a single, lonely MP. The big battle over Brexit may be over, but the underlying issues which it raised, control of borders, money and laws, will not go away anytime soon. Can Labour compete on that landscape? If the new Labour leader is to make real progress, then it will take more than a lick of paint and better presentation. It might need more fundamental thinking about the position of the left of centre in the new age of populist politics. And of course, they will also require some unintentional assistance from the Prime Minister. Next week, we turn to the issue which has dwarfed not just the Labour leadership, but even Brexit itself in the headlines. Have we entered the age of global pandemics? And what, if anything, can any government do about it? Meanwhile, from Alex, myself and all of the team, it's goodbye for now, and we hope to see you next week.